Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the Wren to my Stimpy, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
Today we are talking about centaurs.
Centaurs. So centaurs are a creature of myth.
Mm-hmm.
Famously, they are a man's body down to the waist, and then beyond that is a horse's body. Mm-hmm. But it's not like a horse's, like the back half of a horse. It's a whole horse's body. And where the head is...
Minus head.
Minus the head. And where the head is supposed to be, there's a man. Now, it's pretty widely accepted that this is a society where that has never seen a man riding a horse. Mm-hmm. Describing to another person in their society about a man riding a horse, and they get this out of that somehow. There are historical like predecessors a little bit too, where there actually is a description of a man's like body where he's got the full down to his waist, and then you just have back horse legs beneath it, kind of like a fawn. So there are depictions of that has a separate name, which I cannot remember at the top of my head, and I will not look up right now. In Greek myth, they're characterized very strangely. The Greeks and Romans often would depict battles with centaurs a lot, but some of the most famous centaurs are all like mystics and scholars and stuff. So their characterization's kind of all over the place. In modern times, they still get used a lot. They are strange, not so much in their where they fit in society, but definitely just how does that work, right?
Yeah, their biology raises so many questions.
All right, so I think we're just gonna have to drill down into how do centaurs do, right? Like
being a centaur has got to be so uncomfortable.
Yeah. Do centaurs have two stomachs is a good question. Does a centaur have to eat horse food or do they eat human food? But do they have to eat enough human food to sustain the horse half too? And what's that joint where the neck and the spine get together and
the stomach elbow?
Yeah. It's like a pelvis neck. Just imagine a centaur eating, especially if they're trying to eat grass, where you have the centaur, the human body up at the top, and then they just all the way lean down, and then grabbing fistfuls of grass and shoving it into their mouth.
I figured they almost have to eat like giraffes, right? Picking from the treetops.
That's a good idea. Okay.
But even then, they've got a tiny little human mouth that they got to funnel all this food through to manage not just their human body,
but the horse body too.
Yeah.
And then centaurs cannot wipe their own butts. If you are human level intelligence, you probably would like to wipe your own butt because people are at least a little bit sanitary. And so it's got to itch back there too. And their human hands cannot reach. There's no way. So do centaurs always have to travel in pairs so they can clean each other up?
Or do they just have strange tools they've invented to handle these things?
Oh, they get a long stick?
Yeah.
Or just rub themselves up against the tree or something?
Lick a bear.
Lick a bear? Oh, like a bear.
Like a bear. Lick a bear.
Do not lick bears. Please.
We here at Monster Mechanics do not advocate licking bears.
The internet has pointed out as well that when a horse is born, those suckers can run 15 minutes after dropping out. Human babies do not. So famously the depiction is the horse body running and the human floppy little spineless, boneless baby on top popping around. Okay.
Centaur babies come pre-shaken.
Maybe that's why most of them are dude bros with brain damage. Who have to be fought by Greeks. If you manage to keep one going, coddled for a little while, they grow up to be Chiron or whatever, the really smart ones.
God, live birth for centaur babies has got to be a nightmare too.
I mean, yeah, drop straight down onto that soft, boneless head. That's a high infant mortality rate. Okay, so I think we need to decide if we're going to make any sense out of this, we have to decide upon where do centaurs come from? Why do centaurs, right?
Why are centaurs?
Why are centaurs? Okay, so are they naturally evolved or were they created? I think they've got to be created. It's too much of a clean fusion.
I mean,
right?
Sure, but I feel like that's also so hand-wavy when we could delve into the aspects of how something would evolve that way.
I think we did a lot of the coevolution stuff in our mermaid podcast.
Sure.
So I want to take a slightly different, weirder point. And if they're weird, then it allows us to be off the wall.
Yeah. I'll cop to that.
I think that maybe they are their origin is the equivalent of a transporter accident, where you take a human and a horse and they go through something together and they come out as this horrible mishmash. And it happens to a small population all at once.
So maybe like a Mongol horde or something like...
Can it be a curse, maybe? Like they pissed off a demon or Baba Yaga or something? Okay. So yeah, Baba Yaga is a Russian myth.
Okay.
It's if nobody else remembers this, then she's like the scary witch of Russian folklore. She rides around in a house that has chicken legs, and she tends to sleep on her stove, I believe. That's about all I can remember about Baba Yaga. Because she's Russian in origin, I think that means that she could bump up against the steppe culture like the Mongols pretty easily. You can imagine like a troop of Mongol warriors or horseback riding steppe warriors who like harass Baba Yaga, and she like merges them with their horses.
Oh, I like that. That's awful.
Okay, so we're not going to go into the like details of exactly how the merging happens. You see essentially like them all surrounding her house and she gets pissed off. You just like hard cut to them riding away, and you've got like the fully formed centaurs, the guys with the horse bodies down from their waists. And then trailing behind them is man legs up to the waist, a little butt, and then just a horse head on top running away as well.
That's nightmarish, and I love it. The anti-centaurs.
Yeah. The other halves. Who I'm gonna say those don't make it. They die out.
I think by definition they'd have to.
Yeah, they don't go far. So now we have a small band of centaurs who just a couple hundred guys, not guys and gals, because we need breeding pairs. So it literally is magic has like cut the top of a horse off and splopped a human down, and they just managed to make it work. Yeah, so they just regular old human mandible and teeth, and they've got a full human digestive system down to essentially the large intestine. And then I guess human centipede style, that large intestine is basically just stapled to the start of a horse digestive system. I guess they just digest everything twice.
I guess.
Maybe Baba Yaga has a slightly more... okay. So in this world, we're going to talk... This is a fantasy world where things like this happen all the time. So like the first couple of generations, I think are just like... They're like messes inside. But maybe there's a law of continuity where like a law of authorial revision or something where like as a creature... A magically created creature like breeds a few times. As it goes through, it like starts to make more sense over time. And so we get something a little bit more refined over time. I think we have to start with not the intestinal tract yet, because we can figure that one out. It's just basically a big long tube full of acid in various forms with various absorptions. So we'll figure that out. I think actually the big question is lungs and heart. Yeah. Because you have to have a horse-sized set of lungs and hearts. So do we keep all 4 lungs and 2 hearts?
I feel like you would almost have to.
Okay. They've got almost 2 full circulatory systems, I think, where you've got a big old horse set of lungs and heart in their horse chest and a smaller one. I'm going to say, though, that they need both. Like if you hit either one of those vulnerable sets, if you take one of the hearts, the thing's going to die. If you take out the lower, if you take out both sets of one, I guess it could lose 2 lungs total. If you get 1 human lung and 1 horse lung, people can kind of limp along on just 1 lung, and you just need that much air and to get processed. Oh man, that's a really long esophagus though, to go all the way down. From the human mouth all the way down to those lungs in the back. Yeah. Maybe that as they've sort of adjusted to their form over the next couple of generations, maybe that throat has gotten bigger. Like you might see them and they might have kind of a large neck because they're both their esophagus and their throat, their airway would have expanded just to allow them to get more air in and out quickly. And so you have like that thing goes down and it bifurcates off for the human lungs, and it goes further down to get to the horse lungs, I guess. And having a more muscular neck to support that head that's just constant. Yeah. Like it's always. Yeah. It's like you're riding a horse 24/7, right? Exactly. Yeah. In fact, you'd probably also see some additional muscle kind of going up to the lower back to support that upright stance. Because a centaur it's got a lot more weight up top than a horse head normally does.
Yeah.
And it also goes up higher, so there's more leverage.
And it's less streamlined.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so yeah, they'd actually be, I think they also might just kind of or as they sort of settle into this shape, they're magical in origin, but they're still sort of whatever works, like rapid evolution, right? That's kind of the way we're gonna go with it. I think they might actually have like a squatter, more bulky form around their chest, like real barrel chested, because they've got to get a lot through that torso down to down to their horse parts. Okay. Yeah. Okay. In fact, do we want to keep them bald up top, or do you want to have like the horse hair start to grow in over their human parts? And they're normally traditionally shown as they like wax their chests even normally.
Yeah.
Oh no. Okay. So maybe they're not fully covered with horsehair, but they're getting there. Like they're like the modern version of the centaur has got like a big patch of hair over his chest and he's got big hairy arms, but they are just fussy enough that like depending on the culture, they might completely shave and wax their human bits as a way of sort of showing off that they're still men, you know, as a reaction to being thought of as beasts, maybe. So they might wax. Yeah, I think that roughly makes some sense. Do you think so horses, they do lay down to sleep. You have to like construct special furniture to
assuming they if they lay down, like you can't really roll over as a centaur.
No.
That's a death sentence.
Yeah. You don't want to crush yourself. I think horses do pretty well just laying down on some like hay. Like they don't need a full mattress or anything like that. So a centaur might just have like pillows. Like if you have a centaur house, there might just be a big pile of pillows, and then like a fainting couch, one of those divans,
little chaise lounge.
Yeah, a little chaise that like is just for the top half. So like they lay the horse body down and then they kind of lounge their upper half, and then they're furry on bottom, so they probably don't even need blankets, really. Oh no, horses do need blankets. I see horses wearing horse blankets all the time. Yeah, so they have to like get the big old horse blanket on. Okay, well, and if they're civilized enough to have houses, and if they have running water, they can make themselves a centaur bidet to solve that problem.
You also got to wonder, like, how does a society that, if they want any kind of like clothing or whatnot put on their lower horse half, they basically have to get someone else to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it might make they would either react to being like very blasé about the horse half, be like, yeah, it's just my horse half. Like, yeah, you're gonna see my big horse dong. That's just how it goes. Or it might be a sign of the nobility and how rich you are, that you can wear clothing on your horse parts because you can afford to have servants to put them on. Much like in our culture, especially in Europe and stuff, the way like the construction of dresses and things, there were some like having the lacing in the front used to be a sign that you were poor because you could do your laces up yourself. And if the lacing to tighten it up was in the back, that means that you had a servant to do it.
Interesting, yeah.
So it might be the same sort of dichotomy in centaur culture, where the poor people all just wear like they have a jacket and then a naked horse half, or just something very simple like a blanket. Whereas like the very rich centaurs have horse pants. I don't know what else to call it. Okay.
I'm sorry, horse pants just kind of broke me there.
Okay, so I don't. Okay, so I'm imagining they have to like we have two, like you have an upper and a lower garment usually on a human, and I kind of imagine them as having three. They've got the jacket, like shirt, and then you've got pants, air quotes, which are just the back horse legs that goes like up and over the butt and then like cinches at the waist, and then they have some like almost like a jacket that goes over the middle horse legs. It has to be like zipped or laced up or buckled or something in the middle.
I'm picturing more like almost like a bolero jacket for your for your horse bits.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, now that my train of thought is completely derailed by trying to imagine horse pants.
Or it's just a pair of pants with 4 leg holes and
yeah, but you got just one belt all the way from like the lower hemisphere of the horse.
Yeah.
I will, of course, in the podcast notes, link the would a dog wear pants like this or like this image, which is what we're kind of talking around right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. So going on the principle that in a way that this fantasy world like abhors their system not making sense, they've sort of streamlined their digestion. I think they can't be anything but omnivores because you need to be able to eat high calorie content foods in order to sustain this giant body.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, on that note, they probably will have to get away with eating less poundage of food than horses would, because horses eat plant material, which is low calorie content, and they eat raw food, which is much harder to digest. And so a centaur would be able to have, both meats and fats and things like that, and fruits and nuts and all these things, which are higher calorie content, but they also can cook.
Yeah.
And that means that they won't have to eat quite as much as a horse would. They also might be just a little bit smaller than not smaller than a horse, but on the smaller side of horses. Unless we want to go full out and say that there's like Shetland centaurs and like Clydesdale centaurs.
I mean, I like the idea that there's that kind of differentiation between them.
Okay, let's just go with it. That's great. Okay, so yeah, I think we're definitely going to have to go for the multiple varieties of centaurs, because I think much like we're talking about a world, if it's a fantasy world that sort of abhors things not making sense, it's also one that abhors anything ever being not a bunch of different subraces.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're going to have a bunch of different kinds of goblins and a bunch of, like, a billion different kinds of elves. We're, of course, going to have at least 5 or 6 different kinds of centaur.
Absolutely.
So what would that do to your society if you're all made up of horses? You're all kind of, lots of, you could model them after, the steppe cultures, which we were sort of talking about initially, especially if the initial population of them was from a steppe culture. They'd be nomadic, maybe herdsmen. That could be cool. What if, that's a weird idea, but I like it. What if you have, this is going to not be the same kind of centaur we've been talking about, but what about centaurs, which are essentially always like a man on top, and then whatever herding animal they are associated with, that's what's on bottom. So you could have like in the Lapland areas in the north, people herd reindeer. And so you would have smaller centaurs, which are reindeer on bottom and have antlers, because they're strongly associated with their herds. And sort of if this was a pre-colonial America, you'd have buffalo as a centaur.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it'd be this huge, massive body, and it has to have like an ogre-ish body, like this huge buff dude.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be really cool. And like another one for horses, another one for cattle. Which I guess if this is pre-colonial times, it might be more like the aurochs, which is what modern cows are descended from, or like you could have wildebeest or zebras. There's a whole separate conversation. We're gonna have to put a pin in that because we're gonna come back to what different kind of centaurs could you have with other animals. Let's get back to our Baba Yaga centaurs.
Sure. Well, one thing I think that's kind of influenced society is just their sheer amount of carrying capacity as compared to a normal human.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, they can bring just about anything important with them at all times.
Yeah, provided that they can, like, easily get it onto themselves. And again, they might be sort of tightly knit as a society. Like, you're going to have a couple of centaurs who are kind of always seen with each other because they're trusted to load each other up with items and to wipe each other's butts and get each other maybe dressed and things like that. So like you have this, because they can't handle themselves entirely, they need assistance. You might have just like a tight little family group, maybe 3 or 4 centaurs, or maybe even just a bonded pair who feel very uncomfortable and anxious when they don't have each other around because they feel like I can't handle everything.
Yeah, they're missing a physical part of their existence of like, when I can't wipe my ass, I can't get my clothes off.
Yeah, that's cool. In fact, they might even have a special word. Like we have the word spouse, which is for our romantic partner, but they might have a special word for like that level of intimacy of someone that you trust to wipe your butt and get you dressed and load you up and like to handle all of your horse parts. It's a different relationship than a romantic relationship, but it is like maybe
a high level of trust.
Yes, very, very high level of trust, and it's like a special thing for them. And you can imagine a sufficiently metropolitan centaur, one who's out and about in the world, maybe having that bond with another, like an elf or a human or something. And you get to see that kind of cultural not clash, but like interaction as they develop this, and they have all these expectations for this other person who doesn't have the same sort of needs in return.
Sure.
And so that could be a very interesting sort of storyline to sort of watch that sort of bond together. That could be very cool. As well as being herdsmen, they might be lended towards things like merchants as well, because they would be able to carry things over land a lot easier. They could pull carts and things like that. You might see them as fantasy equivalent of a cabbie in a big city. They've got a special uniform and people can hop on their back. Now, I don't know. For some reason, I feel like riding a centaur is especially insulting to the centaur.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to have that level of bond. So that it's carts at that point, right? Okay. That's cool. Yeah, I could kind of see them being transport specialists. And then also sort of go off of that and have the fully armored centaur going to war, who's not just got the man armor on top, but like full barding on the horse parts as well, carrying a lance. I often see them in fantasy shown as sort of the mounted archer. So you see the horse with a bow a lot. But if you're going just a little bit ahead of that in the sort of timeline of development, you'll see probably the most dangerous single person on a battlefield through a large section of late medieval ages is a fully armored knight on horseback. And if you've got the extra integration of it being the same person, they will be able to not just hit people with their lance and knock out hard targets that way, but just trampling people. Like horse hooves are dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And they weigh they don't weigh an actual ton, I don't think, but they weigh a lot, and therefore can just run over people and do quite a lot of damage that way.
And when you have absolute pristine control over where your horse is going because you are the horse.
Yeah, and exactly where you put the horse hoof and everything like that.
Suddenly that's even more dangerous. So centaur cavalry is probably like highly sought after everywhere.
You can imagine them as being the best cavalry in the world, is being centaur cavalry. In fact, probably like Clydesdale centaur cavalry, if we're talking about varieties, like you have these massive dudes. Yeah, that would be really cool. It also occurs to me they would have to have farriers, right? Like they're gonna have to shoe themselves. We have kind of utilitarian ideas about horseshoes. You know, like horseshoes do a job for us, but I kind of imagine them as almost jewelry-like. Or at least embellishment, even like if you're a working centaur who has to be out there and using your hard-wearing iron shoes all the time, you still want to have some embellishment. And so like you could see them kind of wrapping up over the edge with like engravings or jewelry or spikes if you're a warrior or something like that. So you have this extra bit on you. That could be really cool. And I think a centaur could shoe another centaur. I don't think they would have to outsource that.
Yeah, that seems like something they could definitely do.
Yeah, but it might be that like the best, you could always have like the best farrier in the world be like, get called out to the centaurs because you can make so much more money there, you know? Yeah, okay. Well, we were talking about the centaur live birth problem, but I think that's kind of relatively easy to solve, which is that you have to make the decision. Either they come out a bit less developed or they come out with the human part a bit more developed. The main reason that humans are so neotenous when they're born is because the upright nature of our stance means that the female pelvis had to be narrower, and that meant that we just couldn't hold a child in as long. And then also because we put so much developmental energy into our brains, our heads got larger, and that just the two crossed lines of the graph on that one just crossed at a certain point, and that's how these things go. But a horse pelvis is quite a lot larger. And doesn't have the same sort of constructional problems. So it is entirely valid to say that a newborn centaur might be more like a 2-year-old child in development. You could totally go that way, although I think you have to make it clear that like the kid isn't like aware to the same level. Like having a fully like developed child come out of a woman's is just a little bit weird to me. Yeah. So maybe you want to push that back and have it be more of a less developed foal half. I think I will leave that to the individual to decide. We don't have to make a call there. You just make a decision between one or the other. Certainly a slightly more developed on both halves, where you have a slightly more childlike instead of infant-like human half, means they can sort of keep up with a mobile society better. Yeah, definitely. But if it's a centaurs with carts, you could put a baby in a cart pretty easily, which is also cool. So I think you really could make that work both ways.
And we're also coming at a situation where supposedly like the because these are magically created creatures, most of their original ideas of civilization are going to come from their previous life. And so they're already going to have all these notions of carts and whatnot. It's not going to be like, oh, we had to evolve to this point to understand the wheel and that kind of thing.
Exactly. They're coming in with a bunch of human assumptions about stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you want to push it in one direction or the other, I think you have totally viable options in there. And although I like the idea of, they started as a nomadic civilization, but by the time you sort of see them in the world, they're much more of a sedentary. Like they went through that stage, and they've become this sort of like, because they have cities, they have buildings, they have houses, and they have farms and all that. Because I kind of want to talk about like what does a house look like for centaurs, right? So
doorways a lot taller for sure.
Right. So they're going to have these big doorways, tall ceilings. They're going to have those big rooms like we were talking about with a quote unquote bedroom where you got like little salons. Although they could also just be like they have their sleeping houses and then they might just spend a lot more time outdoors would be another option.
Yeah, I'm picturing them almost more like, and maybe this is just because of how we commonly associate like horses with circuses and whatnot. It's just like everything being pavilions and tents and whatnot.
Yeah. In fact, you could have like this sort of open air Greek style architecture where like a house is a house, but it also has like an open ceiling courtyard area where they go in and out a lot, and they might be able to, you could have awnings that move things around, and they could be kind of flowy in that way.
And like using like more traditional construction materials like stone and whatnot is probably uncomfortable for the horses to walk on, for the horse parts to be on.
Well, it depends on if you do horseshoeing the way we shoe horses, where you're nailing it into the hoof, which is essentially like our equivalent of a fingernail. It's dead. It wouldn't feel it. They might be quite comfortable on quite hard surfaces.
True.
Pretty much why you do that is to keep them from wearing their hooves down too much when they're walking on like roads and concrete and stuff like that. So they might actually be like, no, we don't want carpets, because actually our horse hoofs are going to tear them up really terribly. And so it's just a waste of money to do that. Oh, no, that's how it works. The poor people have hard surfaces or like packed earth floors because they're going to use the permanent, semi-permanent installed shoes. And then the rich centaurs, the ones at the top of the socioeconomic ladder, are going to have, they're not even going to necessarily get shod because they don't have to work. They don't have to go anywhere. So they
have like temporary like horse slippers, that kind of thing.
Yeah. They might put them on occasionally when they need them, but like it's not as practical for working every day. That might be a symbol of how well off a horse is. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. And then it depends on where your story is. If this is still a society that is highly segregated, where each nation sort of has its own thing, and like you're going to have the centaurs all live in the centaur country, the humans all live in the human country. Or if they start to integrate more, it's interesting because like a man on horseback is very strongly associated with like the ruling class in a lot of places. So, you could have peasant versions of, like a centaur who's kind of poor and a working class guy who's got to pull carts and do plowing and stuff like that. Or maybe it's one of those things where like the cultural association is so strong that when a centaur goes and like shows up in human society, they just all assume he's a guy with a peerage, even though he's not. He's just a punter off the street. But because they're like, oh, well, anybody on a horse has got to be rich, right? Yeah. But so maybe he gets treated that way.
Interesting, yeah. I also like the idea that if your civilization has slavery, then centaurs are a prime target for that, because it's just the sheer amount of like power and like physical power that they would have over a normal human would be immense.
And you could make the argument that they might be harder to control because of their horse half. But if we're talking about like a centaur without another like person to care for, like their back half is kind of vulnerable, they might actually be more susceptible to being like, they can't run off because they wouldn't have anybody wipe their butt. And even though they're a slave, at least they're being kind of taken care of a little bit.
Exactly.
Might actually make them vulnerable. That's actually pretty cool. I mean, not great, but it's an interesting story idea. Man, I really hope that they wear pants. That thought keeps bobbing back up in my brain. If you're going to use centaurs, present a lot of really like nitty gritty little problems for like getting through stuff, just because they're so large and kind of inflexible. If you happen to be a GM and you let one of your players have a centaur character, They can't go through any crouched tunnels. They can't like they can't climb a ladder, for example. There's a lot of really niggly little things. So it's definitely something to watch out for. There's a reason why they're not one of the like main playable races. In a lot of games.
Because from a mechanics standpoint, they're just a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Well, I can't go there because I'm 8 feet tall and I've got all these hooves. I'm going to smash you with my beautiful hooves. Sorry. We shouldn't suddenly Mulaney the rest of this episode. So yeah, we've covered like the broad strokes of their biology.
We were talking about different types of centaurs. And horse pants. And now I'm just picturing a half man, half llama with just those big fluffy legs.
Well, we'll talk about the Lamatars in our upcoming episode about all the different kinds of centaur bodies. But that is good. I'm reminded of the fact that, what was it? Somebody on the internet pointed out, since centaurs have 6 limbs, they are technically an insect. Which I like.
It'd be interesting to see a more exoskeletal centaur. How that would work.
I said to put a pin in this, and we're going to come back to it. The parasitic centaur was an idea that I've seen. And I like a lot. A horse body, like a haunted horse body, either a biological creature or maybe this is magical, like undead or something. And right where the neck would start is a hole, like a mouth.
Oh, right. You've mentioned this to me in passing before.
And then it's looking for an upper half. And it's gonna get one. And it's not necessarily going to be pleasant for whoever it chooses to be its upper half. What's the Junji Ito one with the sharks? Because this is the reference. If you want the horror version of this, you go look for the...
I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's escaping me, but I know
I'll put it in the show
notes.
I'll put it in the show notes. There is a Junji Ito story that's kind of the same idea, but he does it better, of course, because he's Junji Ito, about bug bodies that like trap creatures on top of them and just devour them, and it's awful. And it's just awful, as all Junji Ito things are. But I'm thinking of, like, let's say we could do a biological version of this, but I think let's go for, like, this is a magical undead creature. And it has to seek out something that it can use as its upper half. Probably sort of bipedal, roughly man-shaped. It doesn't have to be a human, but something in that range. And it'll trap you, grab you, pull you in, and then it leeches the life force out of that creature for an X amount of time, for a certain amount of time. It sucks the like living bits of you. And so you become more and more undead as this goes on until there is nothing left. And then it discards what remains and goes looking for another one.
I also kind of like the idea that maybe it's not so particular about like getting the orientation right when it's eating you. So there'll be some centaurs that are just running around with like human legs, just kind of flopping around in the air like antenna.
Yeah, totally. I think the reason why you don't see that as often maybe is because literally the person can't breathe. And so it lasts a little while, but eventually like they die much quicker. And so then it just doesn't, but you totally could see it. And then also like it could, if it can't get a hold of a human, which is like its prime, or not human, but like hominid, which is its prime prey, it might get something like a dog or a wolf or a bear or something like that, and have that up top.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, no good. Okay, I'm now going to have to reference a hentai manga in our show notes, but
I don't know if this is a path I can follow you down.
You don't have to go check it out. It's fine. I will put a warning. But this is an idea that's been done. I have seen it, this particular idea where at the mouth, there's a couple of tentacles coming out that's going to grab you and yank you in. And tentacles are no good. That's a good horror trope.
Oh, yeah.
But there's also, I saw one on DeviantArt where it looked like they had like a horse neck spine on the top of it, which then like that kind of latched onto the human spine and the horse skull came down over the head.
Oh, interesting.
Looked rad. I'm also gonna link that one because it's very cool.
That sounds really cool. Yeah.
There's sort of the modern notion of undead, which is sort of a biological process going wrong. That's the zombie idea of like a virus came through and turned these dead bodies into ravenous beasts. But there's an older idea that undead are like something. It's a creature or something with unfinished business. It's got something it needs to do.
The idea of the revenant.
Yeah, and lots of them. Like it's like if you weren't laid to rest properly, or there's various versions of this where they're there for a purpose. And so I'm kind of imagining basically you mistreat a horse badly enough that it dies. It has a chance of coming back as one of these things. where you beat it, you work it too hard, because you can work a horse to death.
Yeah.
They're kind of delicate creatures. And so if you just push it too hard and don't treat it well, it'll just keel over in the middle of work. And that then has a chance of, in the night, its spine or its skull separates from the flesh a little bit, and a gaping maw opens up in its chest area, and it goes looking for people. And then once it's got a person or a bear or something like that to act as its upper half, it goes to exact vengeance on people who mistreat animals or mistreat horses.
Interesting.
I think that's a version of undead that I always like, where it's like it's got an agenda that it's looking for, and it happens to need this upper half, maybe because a horse can't speak.
Oh yeah.
And so it really, really wants a voice to talk about its grievances and to say what was done to it and to like admonish those, and it's like that way it can teach the lesson when it goes after these people.
I'm just picturing like this old evil farmer who's mistreated, ridden horses to death and whatnot. And there's this monologuing centaur zombie figure.
Yeah.
Stalking it, and that kind of droning, like, this is what you did to me.
Yeah. This is what you've done to all the horses before me, and like, this is what you deserve. And like, maybe even might be sort of traditionally haunted, where it's like it's just going to attack you and kill you. But maybe instead it does something. It could be very poetic, where it works you to death. Like it straps you to a plow and makes you do what you did to another animal, another creature. That's very old school. I like that a lot. Two very different ideas of what a centaur could be. Like you have the happy-go-lucky, just another guy who happens to have a horse body and needs pants. And you have the vengeance ghost trying to wreak havoc on those before it. I like that. I like our undead horse vengeance creature. It's horrifying. Oh, actually, okay, so one version of that, like a kind of a sub version of it, I want to marry it to the idea of the Marilu. The Marilu, if you're unfamiliar, is a Christmas tradition from Wales. Okay, there's a whole genre of people making these sort of like, they're called like hobble creatures, where they'll take a pole and they'll put like a head on the end of it, and then they like might decorate it and stuff, and they go around singing with it. And so in Wales, they have one that's called the Marilu, and they put a horse skull on the end of a stick, and then they decorate it with like, they give it eyeballs, and sometimes they give it lashes, which I really love, and they give it this long white flowy fabric behind it, and then they'll go from house to house at Christmas time singing. They'll knock on your door and sing in the voice of the horse. The legend is actually that it's about, sometimes it's vaguely connected to the Bethlehem birth of Jesus myth. Okay. But sometimes it's separate, where it's just about a horse who was heavy with foal and needed a place to give birth to it, and nobody would let her in. And so she died in the wilderness with her baby. And now she goes from house to house hunting everyone, which I think that could be like a subgenre of the centaur, the undead centaur that we've thought up, where much like a mistreated, overworked horse might become one that then is trying to extract vengeance on people. You have a version of it instead where a pregnant mare dies and looks for people and then like goes from house to house, knocking on their doors and demanding entrance, because again, what she's mostly looking for is a voice to voice her grievance, but she can't let her in because she's a horrible undead creature with like a rotting corpse animated at her front half. That could be really cool. And then also monsters that sing, I think, are
awful.
Yeah, I want that. Put that in my story. Let's do that. And she could still be all like pregnant and stuff, and like, yeah. Okay. Well. Do you have anything more on centaurs? Or are we keeping in mind that we're going to have to circle back around for our various other kinds of centaurs?
Oh yeah, we got loads there to look into. At the moment, I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
All right. Well, I think we've got plenty of content on that one. So we'll end it here. All right. Bye. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. You can find links and show notes at our website, monsterpod.org. Or if you'd like to support us, head on over to patreon.com/monsterpod. We can be found on Twitter at MonsterMPod, or you can email us at monstermechanicspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by Scott Paladin. This episode was hosted by Scott Paladin and Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas produced during this podcast are released under a do what the f*** you want public license.